The moonlight cast long shadows across the barren plains of Colorado Territory as Willow Turner stumbled through the darkness, her face bearing the fresh marks of her brother's cruelty. Blood trickled from her split lip as she clutched a small bundle of possessions wrapped in a threadbare shawl. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit had faded, but the terror remained, pulsing through her veins with every labored breath. It was 1873, and at 20 years old, Willow had finally done what she should have years ago she had run. Her legs ached beneath her as she pushed forward, the cool April night air stinging her bruised cheek. The Turner homestead had never been a haven, not since her parents died of fever 3 winters past, leaving her at the mercy of her older brother Frank and his increasingly drunken rages. Tonight's beating had been worse than most, all because she'd refused the marriage proposal of Silas Jenkins, a man 40 years her senior with 3 dead wives and a reputation that made her skin crawl. "You'll do as I say," Frank had roared, his whiskey breath hot against her face as he gripped her arms hard enough to leave fingerprints. "Jenkins will pay good money for you, and we need it." But Willow had made her decision when his hand connected with her face, sending her sprawling across the rough wooden floor. While Frank passed out in a drunken stupor, she gathered what little she could carry and fled into the night. Now, miles from the only home she'd known, exhaustion began to overtake her. The adrenaline that had propelled her forward was waning, and the reality of her situation pressed down upon her shoulders. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The nearest town was Silverwood Creek, still a day's journey on foot, and she had only a few coins tucked into her boot. The distant howl of a coyote sent a shiver down her spine. Willow knew she needed shelter, if only for the night. Ahead, a cluster of cottonwood trees promised some reprieve from the open vulnerability of the plains. As she approached, her eyes caught sight of something unexpected, the warm glow of a campfire. Fear and hope warred within her. A stranger could mean danger, but it could also mean salvation. Inching closer, Willow peered through the branches to assess the situation before committing herself. A lone figure sat by the fire, his back against a saddle, hat tipped low over his eyes. A beautiful chestnut mare grazed nearby, and the smell of coffee and beans wafted through the air, making Willow's empty stomach clench painfully. The man appeared to be dozing, his long legs stretched toward the fire's warmth. A twig snapped beneath Willow's foot, and the man was instantly alert, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip with practiced ease. "Who's there?" His voice was deep, carrying the hint of a southern drawl. "Show yourself." Willow hesitated, weighing her options, but the decision was made for her when dizziness overcame her. She stumbled forward into the firelight, her legs finally giving out after miles of desperate flight. The stranger was on his feet in an instant, moving toward her with swift, sure strides. As darkness began to close in around the edges of her vision, Willow caught a glimpse of concerned blue eyes beneath the brim of a worn leather hat. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Help me." Strong arms caught her as she collapsed, and the last thing she heard before consciousness slipped away was the man's voice, steady and reassuring. "I've got you, madam. You're safe now." Xavier Abernathy had been on the trail for 3 weeks, driving a small herd of horses to his ranch near Silverwood Creek when he decided to make camp by the Cottonwood Grove. At 32, he'd spent more than half his life in the saddle, first as a cavalry scout during the war, then as a Texas Ranger, before finally saving enough to purchase his own spread 2 years prior. Life on the frontier had taught him to be cautious, but it had never hardened his heart. When the woman collapsed in his arms, her face illuminated by the firelight, Xavier felt a surge of protective anger. Someone had hurt her badly. Her right eye was swollen nearly shut, her lips split, and ugly bruises were forming along her jaw. Despite this, he could see she was beautiful, with delicate features and rich auburn hair that had come loose from its pins. Xavier gently laid her down on his bedroll near the fire, covering her with his spare blanket. He dampened his kerchief in his canteen and carefully began to clean the blood from her face. The woman stirred slightly at his touch but didn't wake. "What kind of coward does this to a woman?" he muttered, his jaw tight with barely contained fury. He checked her for other injuries, noting the finger-shaped bruises on her arms. Xavier had seen his share of violence in his years as a ranger, but there was something about the vulnerability of this stranger that stirred something deep within him. Whoever she was running from something or someone and had clearly been desperate enough to flee into the wilderness alone at night. As he tended to her, Xavier noticed a small gold locket around her neck. It had sprung open during her fall, revealing a tiny portrait of a couple, her parents, perhaps. He carefully closed it and continued his ministrations. The night wore on, and Xavier kept watch, occasionally adding wood to the fire and checking on his unexpected guest. Just before dawn, she began to stir, her eyelids fluttering open to reveal eyes the color of summer sage. Willow woke to unfamiliar surroundings, momentarily disoriented until the events of the previous night came rushing back. Pain throbbed through her face as she tried to sit up, a small gasp escaping her lips. "Easy now," came that same deep voice she vaguely remembered from before. "You're safe, but you took quite a beating." Willow's eyes focused on the man sitting across the fire. In the growing light of dawn, she could see him clearly for the first time. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that spoke of years under the sun. His jaw was strong and covered with a few days' worth of stubble, but it was his eyes that captured her attention, blue as a summer sky and filled with concern rather than threat. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Xavier Abernathy," he replied, pouring coffee into a tin cup and offering it to her. "Most folks call me Xav, and you might be." Willow hesitated, fear making her cautious. What if he knew Frank? What if he decided to return her for a reward? As if sensing her thoughts, Xavier added, "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. Your business is your own, but I'd like to help if I can." Something in his steady gaze convinced her. "Willow," she said finally. "Willow Turner." Xavier nodded, not pressing for more information. "Well, Miss Turner, you look like you could use some breakfast. It's nothing fancy, just beans and biscuits, but it's hot." He handed her a plate, and Willow realized how ravenous she was. She ate quickly, trying to maintain some semblance of manners despite her hunger. "Thank you," she said when she'd finished, "for the food and for helping me." Xavier nodded, his expression solemn. No man worth his salt would do otherwise. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "Miss Turner, I don't mean to pry, but whoever did this to you might still be looking for you. Are you in danger?" Willow looked down at her hands, which were trembling slightly. "My brother," she admitted quietly. "He wanted to marry me off to settle his gambling debts when I refused." She gestured to her face, the explanation unnecessary. Xavier's expression darkened, but his voice remained gentle. "Where were you headed?" "Silverwood Creek," she replied. "I thought I might find work there. I can sew and cook, and I'm good with figures." "That's where I'm headed myself," Xavier said. "I've got a ranch about 5 miles outside of town. I'm driving these horses back there." He nodded toward the small herd grazing nearby. "You're welcome to ride along if you'd like. It's a good day's journey, and it's not safe for a woman alone out here." Wariness flickered across Willow's face. She'd learned the hard way that men rarely offered help without expecting something in return. Reading her expression, Xavier held up his hands. "I understand your caution, Miss Turner. You have no reason to trust me, but I give you my word as a gentleman that you'll come to no harm in my company. If you prefer, I can simply escort you to town and be on my way." Willow studied him, weighing her options. Something about Xavier Abernathy's straightforward manner and the genuine concern in his eyes made her inclined to trust him. Besides, she had little choice. The journey to town would be arduous on foot, and her brother might still be searching for her. "I would appreciate the escort, Mr. Abernathy," she said finally. "Thank you." Xavier nodded, seeming pleased. "We'll set out in an hour. That mare over there," he pointed to a gentle-looking bay, "is Daisy. She's steady and sweet-tempered. She'll carry you just fine." As Xavier busied himself breaking camp, Willow took the opportunity to wash her face in the small stream nearby. The cool water stung her cuts, but provided some relief to her swollen eye. Looking at her reflection in the still water, she winced. No wonder Xavier had looked so concerned. Her face was a mosaic of purple and blue, her right eye swollen to a slit. She smoothed her hair as best she could and retied it with the ribbon she'd managed to grab before fleeing. The simple act of grooming herself brought a small measure of dignity back, and she squared her shoulders as she returned to camp. Xavier had saddled both horses and was securing his bedroll when she approached. He looked up, and something in his expression shifted, a flicker of admiration, perhaps. "Ready when you are, Miss Turner," he said, offering his hand to help her mount. Willow placed her hand in his, feeling the strength and calluses of a man who worked with his hands. With a surprisingly gentle touch, Xavier boosted her into the saddle. "Thank you," she murmured, settling herself and arranging her skirts. Xavier mounted his own horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, and with a series of whistles and commands, began moving the small herd of horses forward. He positioned himself so that Willow rode slightly behind him, but within easy conversation distance. As they rode, Willow found herself studying her rescuer. There was an easy confidence in the way he sat his horse, a naturalness that spoke of years in the saddle. His shoulders were broad beneath his worn leather vest, his waist trim above well-fitting denims. A gun belt hung at his hip, the revolver resting in its holster, a clear indication that he knew how to use it. "Have you lived in these parts long, Mr. Abernathy?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Xavier glanced back, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Going on 2 years now. Before that, I was a ranger down in Texas." "A Texas Ranger." Willow couldn't keep the note of admiration from her voice. The Rangers were legendary, known for their courage and unwavering pursuit of justice. "For 7 years, he confirmed. "Decided it was time to put down roots, though. Bought my ranch when land was cheap after a bad drought drove the previous owner out." "And you raise horses?" Xavier nodded. "I do. These are some new stock I picked up from a breeder in Denver. Fine animals with good bloodlines. I'm hoping to establish a reputation for quality mounts." As they continued their journey, Willow found herself relaxing in Xavier's company. He was easy to talk to, sharing stories of his time as a ranger and asking her questions about herself without ever pressing too hard on the painful subjects. By midday, when they stopped to rest the horses and eat a simple lunch of jerky and hardtack, Willow felt as though she'd known him far longer than mere hours. "What will you do when we reach Silverwood Creek?" Xavier asked as they sat in the shade of an old oak tree. Willow sighed, the question bringing her back to the reality of her situation. "Find work, I suppose, a room somewhere, start over." Xavier seemed to consider something, his expression thoughtful. "Miss Turner, I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but I have a proposition for you." Wariness immediately returned to Willow's eyes, and Xavier hurried to clarify. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Hobbs, has been after me to hire some help. She's getting on in years, and the ranch house is more than she can manage alone. If you're in need of employment and a safe place to stay, I could offer you a position, room and board plus wages." The offer was tempting, almost too tempting. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Willow asked, unable to keep the suspicion from her voice. "Partly because I do need the help," Xavier answered honestly. "And partly because I believe people should help each other when they can. This territory's harsh enough without turning our backs on those in need." Willow studied him, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive, but found only sincerity in his blue eyes. I would need to think about it," she said finally. Xavier nodded, seemingly unsurprised by her hesitation. "Of course, the offer stands whenever you decide. No rush." They continued their journey, the landscape gradually shifting as they traveled. The open plains gave way to rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen. In the distance, the jagged peaks of mountains rose against the sky, still capped with snow despite the spring thaw. As the afternoon wore on, Willow found herself growing increasingly drowsy. The lack of sleep from the previous night, combined with the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her, made it difficult to keep her eyes open. Xavier noticed her struggling to stay upright in the saddle. Without a word, he guided his horse alongside hers and reached out to steady her. "We're still a few hours from town," he said. "Why don't you ride with me for a spell? You can rest easier that way." Before Willow could protest, he had dismounted and was standing beside her horse. I won't let you fall, Miss Turner. You have my word. Too exhausted to argue, Willow allowed Xavier to help her down from her mount. With surprising gentleness, he lifted her onto his own horse before swinging up behind her. One strong arm encircled her waist, holding her securely against his chest as he took up the reins with his free hand. Rest now, he murmured, his breath warm against her hair. I've got you. The solid warmth of him behind her and the steady beat of his heart against her back provided a comfort Willow hadn't experienced in years. Despite her best intentions to remain alert, she found herself drifting off, her head lolling back against Xavier's shoulder as exhaustion claimed her. Xavier felt the exact moment Willow surrendered to sleep, her body relaxing against his as her breathing deepened. Something protective stirred within him, an unfamiliar feeling he couldn't quite name. This woman who had literally stumbled into his life less than a day ago was awakening instincts he thought long buried beneath years of solitude. As they rode, he allowed himself to breathe in the faint scent of lavender that clung to her hair despite her ordeal. There was something about Willow Turner that called to him a strength beneath her vulnerability, a dignity that her bruises couldn't diminish. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when they crested a hill, and Silverwood Creek came into view. The town was small but thriving, with a main street lined with businesses, a church steeple rising above the surrounding buildings, and scattered houses extending outward from the center. Xavier gently roused Willow, who blinked awake with momentary confusion before remembering where she was. A flush spread across her cheeks as she realized she'd been sleeping against him. "I'm sorry," she began, but Xavier shook his head. "No need for apologies, Miss Turner. You needed the rest." As they approached the town, Xavier felt Willow tense in front of him. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "What if my brother came looking for me here?" she said quietly, voicing the fear that had suddenly gripped her. "What if someone recognizes me?" Xavier's arm tightened slightly around her waist. "Then they'll have to go through me first," he said, his voice carrying a steel edge that hadn't been there before. "But if you're concerned, we can bypass the town entirely and head straight to my ranch. It's not far." Willow hesitated, torn between her wariness of accepting too much from this man and her fear of being discovered by her brother. "I don't want to impose further," she said finally. "It's no imposition," Xavier assured her. "As I said, I need the help, and Mrs. Hobbs would be delighted to have another woman around the place. You can meet her, see if you're comfortable with the arrangement, and if not, I'll bring you to town tomorrow." Put that way, it seemed reasonable, and Willow found herself nodding. "Very well, Mr. Abernathy. I accept your offer temporarily, at least," Xavier smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Xav," he corrected gently. "If we're to be employer and employee, you might as well use my given name." "Xav," Willow repeated, finding she liked the sound of it. "And I'm Willow." With that settled, Xavier guided their horses away from the main road leading into town, taking a smaller trail that wound through pine-covered hills. After about 40 minutes of riding, they emerged from the trees to see a valley spread out before them. Nestled in its center was a substantial ranch house of hewn logs with a wide porch wrapping around it. Several outbuildings, including a large barn, bunkhouse, and corrals filled with horses, completed the picture. "Welcome to Whispering Pines Ranch," Xavier said, a note of pride in his voice. As they approached, Willow couldn't help but be impressed. The ranch was well maintained, the buildings solid and in good repair. Flower beds, still dormant from winter but neatly tended, lined the front of the house, and smoke curled invitingly from the stone chimney. The front door opened as they rode into the yard, and an older woman emerged onto the porch. She was small but straight-backed, with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Xavier Abernathy, you're 3 days late," she called, her tone scolding but affectionate. "I was beginning to worry," she broke off as she noticed Willow, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of the younger woman's bruised face. Xavier dismounted and helped Willow down, keeping a steadying hand at her elbow when she swayed slightly. "Mrs. Hobbs, this is Miss Willow Turner. She's in need of a safe place to stay and some honest work. I've offered her a position helping you with the house." Mrs. Hobbs's expression softened immediately. "Well, it's about time," she said, coming down the steps. "I've been telling him for months that this place is too much for one old woman to manage." She extended a work-worn hand to Willow. "Eleanor Hobbs, my dear, you look like you could use a hot meal and a warm bath." Willow felt tears spring to her eyes at the simple kindness. "Thank you," she managed. "That sounds wonderful." "You see to the horses, Xavier," Mrs. Hobbs instructed, taking charge. "I'll look after Miss Turner." Xavier nodded, touching the brim of his hat. "Yes, madam." To Willow, he added, "I'll see you at supper." Mrs. Hobbs's cooking is the best in the territory. As Xavier led the horses toward the barn, Mrs. Hobbs gently guided Willow into the house. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, with sturdy furniture, colorful braided rugs, and windows that let in plenty of light. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, taking the chill from the spring evening air. "Let's get you settled, dear," Mrs. Hobbs said, "and then we can see to those bruises." She led Willow upstairs to a pleasant bedroom with a view of the mountains. A simple but well-made bed stood against one wall, a chest of drawers against another, and a small writing desk beneath the window. A colorful quilt brightened the bed, and fresh wildflowers stood in a jar on the bedside table. "This is lovely," Willow said, genuinely touched by the welcoming atmosphere. "It's been empty too long," Mrs. Hobbs replied. "Now, let me draw you a bath, and then we can talk about what brought you here." An hour later, Willow sat at the kitchen table wrapped in a borrowed robe, her damp hair hanging loose down her back. Mrs. Hobbs had gently tended to her bruises with arnica salve and provided her with a clean nightgown and robe, promising to wash her travel-worn clothes. Over cups of fragrant tea, Willow found herself telling the older woman about her brother's abuse and her desperate flight. Mrs. Hobbs listened without interruption, her kind face showing sympathy but no pity. "Well, you're safe now," she said when Willow had finished. "Xavier won't let any harm come to you, and neither will I." "You seem very fond of him," Willow observed. Mrs. Hobbs smiled. "I've known that boy since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. His father and my late husband rode together in the Rangers. When I lost Jacob 3 years ago, Xavier made sure I always had a place here." Her eyes twinkled. "He puts on a tough exterior, but he's got a heart as big as all outdoors." "He's been very kind," Willow agreed, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the tea. "And not hard on the eyes either," Mrs. Hobbs added with a knowing smile that made Willow blush. Before she could respond, the back door opened, and Xavier stepped in, bringing with him the scent of horses and fresh air. He'd cleaned up, his hair still damp from washing, and changed into a clean shirt. He stopped short at the sight of Willow, something flickering in his eyes that made her heart beat a little faster. "Feeling better?" he asked, his voice gentler than she'd heard it before. Willow nodded. "Much, thank you. Mrs. Hobbs has been very kind. She's agreeable when she wants to be," Xavier said with a teasing glance at the older woman who sniffed in mock offense. "Sit down and eat your supper," Mrs. Hobbs instructed. "Both of you must be famished after your journey." The meal was simple but delicious: venison stew, fresh bread, and preserved peaches for dessert. Xavier ate with the hearty appetite of a man who had worked hard, while Willow found herself growing sleepy again despite her best efforts. "You should rest," Xavier said, noticing her stifled yawn. "Tomorrow's soon enough to talk about duties and such." Willow nodded gratefully. "Thank you again for everything, Mr. Zav." His smile at her use of his name was warm. "Sleep well, Willow." That night, for the first time in years, Willow fell asleep without fear, the sound of the wind in the pines outside her window a gentle lullaby. The following weeks saw Willow settling into life at Whispering Pines Ranch. Her bruises faded, and with them, some of the wariness that had characterized her first days there. Mrs. Hobbs was a patient teacher, showing her the rhythms of running the large household, from baking bread in the cast-iron stove to managing the laundry for Xavier and the 3 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse. Xavier himself was often busy with the horses, but he made a point of taking meals with Willow and Mrs. Hobbs. His deep voice and occasional laugh becoming a sound Willow looked forward to each day. Sometimes in the evenings, he would read aloud from one of the books in his surprisingly extensive library, while Willow mended or sewed. It was during one such evening, about 3 weeks after her arrival, that Willow realized how comfortable she had become in his presence. Mrs. Hobbs had retired early with a headache, leaving Willow and Xavier alone in the parlor. He was reading from The Three Musketeers, his voice bringing the adventures to life, while Willow worked on a new apron. When he paused to take a sip of water, Willow looked up to find him watching her, his blue eyes intent. "What is it?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You're different," he said simply. "More at ease, it suits you." Willow felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "I feel safe here," she admitted. "I can't remember the last time I felt that way." Xavier set the book aside, his expression serious. "You are safe here, Willow. I want you to know that." "I do know it," she said softly, "and I'm grateful." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. After a moment, Xavier spoke again. "Would you like to learn to ride properly? I've noticed you're still a bit hesitant with the horses." Willow's eyes widened in surprise. "Really? You wouldn't mind teaching me? I'd enjoy it," he said with a smile. "Tomorrow afternoon if the weather holds." "I'd like that very much," Willow replied, returning his smile. The next day dawned clear and warm, perfect for riding. After lunch, Xavier led Willow to the corral where a gentle mare named Lily waited, already saddled. "She's perfect for beginners," Xavier explained, helping Willow mount. Steady and forgiving. For the next hour, he guided her through the basics of horsemanship, his hands occasionally steadying her or adjusting her posture. Each touch sent a flutter through Willow's stomach, a sensation she tried to attribute to the excitement of learning something new. "You're a natural," Xavier said approvingly as she successfully guided Lily around the corral at a walk. "Ready to try a trot?" Willow nodded, determined to master this new skill. As Lily moved into the faster gait, however, Willow found herself bouncing uncomfortably in the saddle. Xavier laughed, the sound warm and rich. "You need to move with the horse," he explained, stepping closer. "May I?" At Willow's nod, he placed his hands on her waist, guiding her body to the rhythm of the horse's movement. "Like this," he said, his voice close to her ear. "Feel the pattern and match it." Willow was acutely aware of his touch, the warmth of his hands through the fabric of her dress, the strength in them as he guided her movements. Gradually, she began to find the rhythm, her body syncing with Lily's gait. "That's it," Xavier encouraged, stepping back. "You've got it now." Pride bloomed in Willow's chest at his approval, and she couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. When she finally dismounted, her legs were wobbly, but her spirit was soaring. "Thank you," she said breathlessly. "That was wonderful." Xavier's expression as he looked down at her was warm. "You're welcome. We'll make a horsewoman of you yet." As the days passed, riding lessons became a regular part of their routine. Willow progressed quickly, gaining confidence with each session. Soon, she and Xavier were taking short rides around the property, exploring the pine forests and meadows that made up Whispering Pines Ranch. During these rides, they talked more freely than they did in the house. Xavier told her stories of his childhood in Texas, of his time as a ranger, and of his dreams for the ranch. In turn, Willow shared memories of her parents and her life before her brother's cruelty had overtaken everything. One particularly beautiful afternoon in late May, they rode to a secluded pond fed by a mountain stream. Wildflowers carpeted the surrounding meadow, and the water sparkled in the sunlight. "This is my favorite spot on the ranch," Xavier said as they dismounted. "I come here to think sometimes." Willow walked to the edge of the pond, admiring the clear water. "It's beautiful," she said, "so peaceful." Xavier came to stand beside her, his shoulder nearly touching hers. "Willow," he began, his voice unusually hesitant, "I've been meaning to ask you something." She turned to look at him, struck by the uncertainty in his expression. "What is it? Are you happy here?" he asked. "With your position, I mean." Willow considered the question. "Yes," she answered honestly. "Happier than I've been in a very long time." Relief crossed his features. "Good. I was worried you might be thinking of moving on soon." "Do you want me to leave?" Willow asked, suddenly anxious. "No," Xavier said quickly, reaching out to take her hand. "The opposite, in fact. I've grown, accustomed to having you around. The ranch seems brighter somehow." The warmth of his hand around her sent that now familiar flutter through Willow's stomach. "I've grown accustomed to being here too." she admitted softly. They stood in silence for a moment, neither quite ready to acknowledge the growing connection between them. Finally, Xavier cleared his throat. "We should head back," he said, reluctantly releasing her hand. "Mrs. Hobbs will be wondering where we've gotten to." As they rode back to the ranch, Willow found herself thinking about the way Xavier's hand had felt holding hers, the intensity in his blue eyes as he'd spoken of wanting her to stay. Something was changing between them, something that both thrilled and frightened her. That evening at supper, Mrs. Hobbs announced that she would be visiting her sister in Denver for 2 weeks. "She's having her second child any day now, and she's asked for my help," the older woman explained. "Of course you must go," Xavier said immediately. "Family comes first." Mrs. Hobbs glanced between Xavier and Willow. "Will you two be all right managing without me? I know it's not quite proper, but we'll manage just fine," Xavier assured her. "Besides, the ranch hands are always around, and Willow is perfectly safe with me." "I know that," Mrs. Hobbs said with a small smile. "I just don't want to give anyone in town cause for gossip." Willow felt a blush rise to her cheeks at the implication. "When will you leave?" she asked, changing the subject. "Tomorrow morning. The stage leaves at 9. After Mrs. Hobbs retired for the night, Xavier lingered in the kitchen where Willow was finishing the dishes. "I can ride into town tomorrow if you'd prefer," he offered, to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Willow turned to face him, surprised by the offer. "Do you want to?" "No," he answered honestly, "but I would if it made you more comfortable." Something about his directness gave Willow courage. "I'm not concerned about appearances," she said. "Not with you." Their eyes held for a long moment, and Willow felt her heart beat faster at the warmth in his gaze. Finally, Xavier nodded. "Good night then, Willow," he said softly. "Sleep well." "Good night, Xav," she replied, watching as he turned and left the kitchen, his footsteps fading down the hallway. The next morning, Xavier drove Mrs. Hobbs to town in the wagon. When he returned, Willow was surprised to see he had brought supplies from the general store, including several yards of pretty calico fabric. "I thought you might like to make yourself some new dresses," he explained somewhat awkwardly when she exclaimed over the material. "I noticed yours are getting a bit worn." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Willow impulsively stood on tiptoe and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. "Thank you," she said, stepping back quickly, suddenly shy. Xavier's hand rose to touch the spot where her lips had brushed his skin, his expression unreadable. "You're welcome," he said, his voice slightly rough. "I have work to do in the barn. I'll see you at supper." As he strode away, Willow pressed her hands to her heated cheeks, wondering at her own boldness. The simple gesture had felt so natural in the moment, but now she worried she had overstepped. The day passed slowly as Willow attended to her usual duties and began cutting the pattern for a new dress. By the time evening arrived, she had convinced herself that she had imagined the tension between them that morning. But when Xavier entered the kitchen for supper, his eyes immediately sought hers, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. They ate in a silence that was charged with unspoken words, the air between them almost crackling with awareness. After the meal, instead of retiring to the parlor as usual, Xavier suggested a walk. "It's a beautiful evening," he said, "and I find I need some air." Willow nodded, grateful for the chance to escape the confines of the house and the emotions swirling within her. They walked in silence to the edge of the pine forest, where a fallen log provided a natural bench overlooking the valley. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, casting a warm glow over the landscape. "Willow," Xavier began, his voice low. "I need to say something, and I ask that you hear me out before responding." Her heart pounding, Willow nodded. Xavier took a deep breath. "When you came into my life 2 months ago, I had no idea how much things would change. I thought I was content with my solitary existence, with just the ranch and my horses for company. But now—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Now I can't imagine this place without you in it." Willow's breath caught in her throat as Xavier turned to face her fully. "I know you came here seeking shelter, safety from the harm your family caused you. And I promised myself I would be that for you, a safe harbor, nothing more, but my feelings have grown beyond that." His blue eyes held her steadily. I care for you, Willow, more than I thought possible. Tears sprang to Willow's eyes at his words, her heart so full it felt it might burst. Oh, Xav, she whispered. I care for you too. Relief and joy spread across his features. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Xavier reached out and cupped her face in his hand. His thumb gently traced the curve of her cheek, now healed of all bruises. May I kiss you? He asked, his voice a whisper. In answer, Willow leaned forward, closing the distance between them. His lips met hers in a kiss so tender it brought fresh tears to her eyes. His hand slid to the back of her neck, cradling her head as the kiss deepened, becoming something more heated, more urgent. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that for weeks, he admitted. Willow laughed softly, joy bubbling up within her. So have I. They sat together as darkness fell, talking softly, sharing gentle kisses and tentative caresses. By the time they walked back to the house, hand in hand under a sky full of stars, Willow knew with certainty that she had found not just shelter, but home. The following days were filled with a new sweetness as Xavier and Willow explored their changing relationship. During the day, they maintained a semblance of their normal routine, Xavier working with the horses, Willow tending to the house, but their eyes would meet across a room, a shared glance conveying what words could not. In the evenings, they would walk together or sit on the porch swing, talking late into the night. One evening, about a week after Mrs. Hobbs's departure, Xavier suggested they ride into town for supplies. And perhaps dinner at the hotel, he added. It would be nice to take you somewhere special. Willow agreed eagerly, looking forward to seeing more of Silverwood Creek. She wore her new dress, a pretty blue calico that matched her eyes, and Xavier's appreciative gaze as she came down the stairs made her blush with pleasure. The town was busier than Willow had expected, with wagons and horses lining the main street. Xavier helped her down from her horse in front of the general store, his hands lingering at her waist. I need to stop by the blacksmith's while we're here, he said. Do you mind looking at the fabric selection? Mrs. Hobbs mentioned wanting new curtains for the parlor before she left. Willow nodded, secretly pleased at the domestic nature of the errand. I'll meet you back here in half an hour, Xavier smiled, touching the brim of his hat. Don't let Mrs. Peterson talk you into buying more than we need, he warned, referring to the shopkeeper's wife known for her salesmanship. She can be persuasive. Laughing, Willow entered the store, enjoying the array of goods on display. She was examining a bolt of cream-colored muslin when a voice behind her froze the blood in her veins. Well, if it isn't my runaway sister. Willow turned slowly to face her brother, Frank Turner. He looked much as she remembered, tall and broad-shouldered like their father had been, but with none of the kindness in his face. His eyes were bloodshot, suggesting he had already been drinking despite the early hour. Frank, she acknowledged, her voice steadier than she felt. What are you doing here? Looking for you, he growled, stepping closer. You've caused me a heap of trouble, girl. Jenkins withdrew his offer after you disappeared, said he wouldn't pay for damaged goods that might not even be delivered. Fear clawed at Willow's throat, but she forced herself to stand her ground. I'm not going back with you, she said firmly. I have a life here now. Frank's eyes narrowed. Is that right? And what kind of life would that be? You always were too proud for your own good. His gaze traveled over her new dress. Found yourself a protector, have you? Spreading your legs for some cowboy, anger flashed through Willow, burning away some of the fear. You don't know anything about my life, she hissed. Now leave me alone. She tried to move past him, but Frank grabbed her arm, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. You're coming with me, he said, his voice low and threatening. You belong to me until I say otherwise. Let her go. Xavier's voice, cold as steel, cut through the tension. He stood in the doorway of the store, his posture deceptively relaxed, but Willow could see the dangerous glint in his eyes. Frank's grip on her arm tightened. This ain't your business, mister. This here's my sister, and she's coming home with me. Xavier stepped fully into the store, his movements deliberate. I believe the lady said she's staying. His hand rested casually near his holstered revolver, and I'm making it my business. Mrs. Peterson, the shopkeeper's wife, hurried forward. Is there a problem here? she asked, her eyes darting nervously between the men. No problem at all, Xavier said smoothly, his gaze never leaving Frank. Mr. Turner was just leaving, Frank's face flushed with anger. You don't tell me what to do, he snarled. Willow is my flesh and blood, and the law says I have rights over her. The law also has something to say about assault, Xavier replied, nodding toward Frank's grip on Willow's arm, and about attempted kidnapping. A small crowd had begun to gather at the store entrance, drawn by the rising voices. Frank glanced around, seeming to realize he was outnumbered. With a muttered curse, he released Willow's arm. This ain't over, he threatened, backing toward the door. To Willow, he added, I'll be seeing you again, sister dear. As Frank pushed his way through the onlookers and out of the store, Xavier was immediately at Willow's side. Are you all right? He asked, his eyes scanning her face. Willow nodded, though she was trembling. He found me, she whispered, the reality of it sinking in. How did he find me? Xavier's arm encircled her shoulders protectively. It doesn't matter, he won't touch you again, I promise you that. Mrs. Peterson approached, concern evident on her face. Miss Turner, I had no idea. Is there anything I can do? Thank you, but no, Willow replied, making an effort to compose herself. I should probably return to the ranch. Xavier nodded, guiding her toward the door. We'll come back another day for those curtains, Mrs. Peterson. Outside, the townsfolk who had witnessed the confrontation watched curiously as Xavier helped Willow onto her horse. Willow could feel their stares, could almost hear the whispers that would spread through town. Hold your head high, Xavier murmured as he mounted his own horse. You've done nothing wrong. They rode in silence for a while, Willow lost in thought. Finally, she spoke. He won't give up, Xav. I know my brother. He sees me as his property. Xavier's expression hardened. Then he'll have to go through me to get to you. I'm afraid for you, Willow admitted. Frank is dangerous when he drinks, and he's almost always drinking. I can handle myself, Xavier assured her, his voice gentle despite the steel beneath it. But perhaps we should consider making our arrangement more permanent. Willow looked at him in surprise. What do you mean? Xavier guided his horse closer to hers, reaching across to take her hand. I mean that I love you, Willow Turner. I think I have since the moment you stumbled into my camp. I was planning to wait to give you more time, but circumstances being what they are. He took a deep breath. Will you marry me? Joy and disbelief warred within Willow. You want to marry me, more than anything, Xavier replied, his blue eyes intense. Not just to protect you from your brother, though I would do anything to keep you safe, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Tears filled Willow's eyes as happiness bloomed in her chest. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Xavier's smile was radiant as he leaned across the space between their horses to kiss her, a brief but passionate meeting of lips that promised more to come. We'll ride to the judge's office tomorrow, he said as they continued toward home. Get the license, make it official as soon as possible. Willow's heart soared at the thought, but a shadow of worry remained. What about Frank? Xavier's expression grew serious. We'll deal with that problem when it arises. For now, let's focus on our future together. That night, their kisses were deeper, more urgent, but Xavier pulled away before things went too far. 2 more days, he murmured against her lips. 2 days and you'll be my wife, I can wait. Willow smiled, her heart full. I love you, Xavier Abernathy. And I love you, Willow Turner, soon to be Abernathy, he replied, pressing one last kiss to her forehead before reluctantly bidding her good night. The next morning, they rode into town again, this time heading directly to the judge's office. Judge Hollister, a kindly older man with spectacles perched on his nose, was happy to issue them a marriage license. I can perform the ceremony day after tomorrow if you'd like, he offered. Unless you're planning something more elaborate, Xavier looked to Willow, who shook her head. Simple is fine, she said. Just us and perhaps Mrs. Hobbs if she's back from Denver in time. Day after tomorrow it is then, the judge said, marking it in his ledger. 2 o'clock suit you. With the arrangements made, Xavier suggested they visit the telegraph office. I want to send a message to Mrs. Hobbs, he explained. She'd never forgive us if we got married without telling her. As they walked down the boardwalk, Willow couldn't help scanning the street for any sign of her brother. Xavier, sensing her unease, kept a protective arm around her waist. He's probably nursing a hangover somewhere, he reassured her. "And even if he's not, I won't let him near you." After sending the telegraph, they decided to have lunch at the hotel dining room before heading back to the ranch. The meal was pleasant, with Xavier telling stories that made Willow laugh, momentarily forgetting her concerns. They were just finishing dessert when the hotel manager approached their table. "Mr. Abernathy, there's a gentleman asking for you at the front desk, says it's urgent ranch business." Xavier frowned slightly. "Did he give a name?" "Johnson, I believe." "Said he's interested in purchasing one of your horses." Xavier glanced at Willow. "Wait here," he said. "I'll be right back." As soon as Xavier left the dining room, Willow felt a prickle of unease. Something didn't feel right. After a moment's hesitation, she rose and followed the path Xavier had taken. The hotel lobby was empty except for the clerk behind the desk, who looked up in surprise as Willow entered. "Can I help you, miss?" "I'm looking for Mr. Abernathy," Willow said. "The manager said he was meeting someone here." The clerk looked confused. "No one's been at the desk asking for Mr. Abernathy. The manager went out back about 20 minutes ago to oversee a delivery." Alarm shot through Willow as she realized the deception. "Where's the back entrance?" she asked urgently. "Through that hallway," but Willow was already moving, her heart pounding with fear. The hallway led to a service entrance that opened into an alley behind the hotel. As she pushed open the door, the sound of a scuffle reached her ears. Xavier was facing off against 3 men, Frank and 2 rough-looking strangers. One of the strangers was nursing what looked like a broken nose, blood streaming down his face, while Frank circled Xavier warily. "You should have minded your own business, Abernathy," Frank was saying. "Now you'll pay for interfering." Xavier's back was to Willow, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Last chance to walk away, Turner," he warned. "I don't want to kill you, but I will if I have to." Frank laughed, an ugly sound. 3 against 1, I like those odds." Before Willow could call out a warning, the third man lunged at Xavier from the side. Xavier ducked the blow and responded with a swift uppercut that sent the man staggering, but the distraction allowed Frank to close the distance, something metallic glinting in his hand. "No." Willow screamed, rushing forward. Xavier spun at the sound of her voice, narrowly avoiding Frank's knife. His momentary distraction cost him, though, as the man with the broken nose tackled him from behind, driving him to the ground. Willow looked around desperately for a weapon, finding a discarded piece of lumber near the alley wall. She grabbed it and swung with all her might at the back of the attacker's head. The wood connected with a sickening crack, and the man collapsed atop Xavier. Xavier shoved the unconscious body aside and scrambled to his feet just as Frank lunged again with the knife. This time, Xavier was ready. He caught Frank's wrist, twisting until the knife clattered to the ground, then delivered a powerful blow to the older Turner's jaw. Frank went down hard, and Xavier immediately turned to face the third attacker who was backing away, hands raised in surrender. "Get out of here," Xavier growled, and the man took off running down the alley, breathing heavily. Xavier turned to Willow. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. Willow shook her head, still clutching the makeshift weapon. "I'm fine, but you're bleeding." Xavier touched his temple, his fingers coming away red. "It's nothing," he said dismissively, moving to her side. "We need to get the sheriff." A groan from the ground drew their attention. Frank was regaining consciousness, struggling to sit up. His eyes focused on Willow, hatred burning in them. "You little witch," he slurred, blood trickling from his split lip. "Siding with a stranger against your own kin." "You stopped being my family the day you raised your hand to me," Willow replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I have a new family now." Frank lunged for the fallen knife, but Xavier was faster. He kicked the weapon away and hauled Frank to his feet, slamming him against the alley wall. "Listen carefully," Xavier said, his voice dangerously soft. "Willow and I are getting married tomorrow. After that, if you ever come near her again, if you so much as speak her name, I will end you. Do you understand?" Frank's eyes darted between Xavier and Willow, calculation replacing some of the hatred. "She ain't worth the trouble anyway," he muttered finally. Xavier's grip on Frank's collar tightened. "Say it, say you understand." "I understand," Frank ground out. Xavier released him with a slight shove. "Now get out of my sight." and take your friend with you when he wakes up." Frank hesitated, as if considering another attack, but something in Xavier's stance seemed to convince him otherwise. With a final glare at Willow, he staggered to his friend's side and began trying to rouse him. Xavier placed a protective arm around Willow's shoulders. "Let's go," he said quietly. "I want to report this to the sheriff, but I want you away from here first." As they walked back through the hotel, Xavier keeping himself between Willow and the alley, Willow felt a strange mix of emotions: fear and relief, anger and love. "You could have been killed," she said once they were on the street, heading toward the sheriff's office. Xavier's arm tightened around her. "So could you," he replied, his voice tight. "What were you thinking, coming after me like that?" "I was thinking I couldn't lose you," Willow said simply. Xavier stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Right there on the main street of Silverwood Creek, with townsfolk passing by and the afternoon sun beating down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her deeply. "You won't lose me," he promised when they broke apart. "Not ever." The remainder of the day passed in a blur of statements to the sheriff and preparations for their hasty wedding. By the time they returned to the ranch, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "Are you sure you still want to do this tomorrow?" Xavier asked as they sat on the porch, watching the colors fade from the sky. "We could wait, give you more time." Willow shook her head. "I don't need more time. I know what I want, and it's you, it's us, together." Xavier smiled, pulling her close against his side. "Then tomorrow it is, Mrs. Abernathy to be." That night, Willow lay awake in her bed, thinking about all that had happened since she fled her brother's cruelty. She had been so afraid, so alone, with nothing but terror and uncertainty ahead of her. And then Xavier had found her, had offered her shelter when she needed it most. "I'll be your shelter always," he had promised, and he had kept that promise, standing between her and harm without hesitation. Tomorrow she would become his wife. The thought filled her with a joy so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Not tears of sorrow or fear, but of happiness pure and complete. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself approved of their union. A telegram arrived from Mrs. Hobbs, expressing her delight at their news and her regret at missing the ceremony, but promising to return within the week to properly celebrate. At 1:30, Willow stood before the small mirror in her room, putting the finishing touches on her appearance. She wore her blue dress, the one Xavier had bought the fabric for, and had woven wildflowers into her hair, which hung loose down her back at Xavier's request. A knock at her door made her turn. "Come in," she called, expecting one of the ranch hands who had offered to drive them to town. Instead, it was Xavier who entered, looking handsome in a clean black suit, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. He stopped short at the sight of her, his expression one of wonder. "You're not supposed to see me before the wedding," Willow protested, but she was smiling. "I couldn't wait," Xavier admitted, crossing the room to take her hands in his. "You look beautiful." Willow blushed under his admiring gaze. "So do you," she replied. "Handsome, I mean." Xavier laughed, the sound warming her heart. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I was going to wait until after the ceremony, but..." He pulled out a small velvet box. "This was my mother's. I'd like you to have it." Inside the box was a simple gold band set with a single small diamond. "Oh, Xav," Willow breathed. "It's beautiful." "Not as beautiful as you," he said softly, taking the ring from the box. "May I?" Willow nodded, tears blurring her vision as Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "Now we're really doing this," Xavier said, his voice husky with emotion. "In less than an hour, you'll be my wife." "And you'll be my husband," Willow replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Xavier's hands cupped her face gently. "I promise you, Willow Turner, that I will spend every day of my life making you happy. I will be your shelter, your strength, your partner in all things." Willow reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "And I promise you, Xavier Abernathy, that I will love you with all that I am, all that I have. I will be your comfort, your joy, your home." Their lips met in a kiss that sealed their promises, a prelude to the vows they would soon speak before God and the law. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling through tears. "We should go," Xavier said reluctantly. "The judge is waiting." Hand in hand, They walked down the stairs and out to the waiting wagon. The ranch hands cheered as they emerged from the house, their genuine happiness for their boss and the woman who had brought light back into Whispering Pines evident. The ride to town was filled with anticipation, their hands clasped tightly between them. Willow couldn't stop looking at the ring on her finger, tangible proof that this was real, that her dreams were coming true. Judge Hollister was waiting for them in his office, his wife beside him to serve as witness. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, the traditional words taking on new depth as Willow and Xavier spoke them to each other. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the judge said, beaming at the couple. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Abernathy." Xavier needed no further encouragement. He gathered Willow into his arms, his kiss tender yet passionate, a promise of all that was to come. "Mrs. Abernathy," he murmured against her lips when they finally broke apart. Willow smiled up at him, joy radiating from her entire being. "My husband," she replied, the words sweet on her tongue. After thanking the judge and his wife, they decided to celebrate with dinner at the hotel, this time without interruption. The dining room manager, who had heard about the previous day's events, personally escorted them to the best table and insisted on bringing champagne on the house. As they dined, townsfolk stopped by their table to offer congratulations. Some Willow recognized from her previous visits to town, others were strangers, but all seemed genuinely pleased for them. "Word travels fast in a small town," Xavier commented as yet another well-wisher departed their table. "Does it bother you?" Willow asked. "The attention?" Xavier shook his head, his eyes never leaving hers. "Not at all. I'm proud to have you as my wife. Let the whole territory know." As twilight fell, they rode back to the ranch, their home, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky above them. A sense of peace settled over Willow as the familiar outline of the ranch house came into view. This was where she belonged, beside this man who had promised to be her shelter always. Xavier helped her down from her horse, but instead of setting her on her feet, he swept her into his arms. "Tradition says I should carry you across the threshold," he said with a smile. Willow laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Who am I to argue with tradition?" Carrying her as if she weighed nothing, Xavier climbed the porch steps and pushed open the front door. The house was quiet, the ranch hands having tactfully made themselves scarce. A fire had been laid in the hearth, waiting only for a match to bring it to life. Xavier set Willow gently on her feet but kept his arms around her. "Welcome home, Mrs. Abernathy," he said softly. "I've been home since the day I met you," Willow replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. This kiss was different from the ones they had shared before, deeper, more urgent, with no reason to hold back. Xavier's hands traveled down her back, pulling her closer against him, while Willow's fingers tangled in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted you for so long," he murmured. "But if you need time," Willow silenced him with another kiss. "I don't need time," she whispered against his lips. "I need you." With a groan, Xavier swept her into his arms once more, carrying her up the stairs to what was now their bedroom. The room was bathed in the soft glow of a lamp that someone, probably one of the ranch hands' wives, had thoughtfully lit. Xavier set Willow down beside the bed, his eyes never leaving hers as he slowly unbuttoned his jacket and waistcoat. Willow's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the buttons of her dress, but Xavier gently moved them aside. "Let me," he said, his voice husky. With reverent hands, he undid each button, pressing soft kisses to the skin he exposed. Willow closed her eyes, surrendering to the sensations he was awakening within her. When her dress finally pooled at her feet, Xavier's sharp intake of breath made her open her eyes. "You are so beautiful," he whispered, his gaze traveling over her figure, clad now only in her chemise and petticoats. Willow reached for him, her fingers working at the buttons of his shirt. "I want to see you too," she said, surprised by her own boldness. Together, they removed the barriers between them, each article of clothing discarded revealing more of themselves to each other. When they were finally skin to skin, Xavier lifted Willow onto the bed, following her down onto the soft mattress. "I love you," he murmured, his lips tracing the curve of her neck. "My wife, my heart." I love you too, Willow gasped as his hands and mouth explored her body, awakening sensations she had never imagined. My husband, my shelter. Their joining was tender yet passionate, Xavier's experience guiding Willow through the initial discomfort to a pleasure that left her breathless. Together, they found a rhythm as ancient as time itself, their bodies speaking a language of love and devotion that transcended words. Afterward, they lay entwined, Willow's head resting on Xavier's chest, his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her ear. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder as they basked in the afterglow of their lovemaking. Happy? Xavier asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Willow smiled, tightening her arm around his waist. Completely, she replied. And you? More than I ever thought possible, he assured her. You've given me everything I never knew I was missing. They drifted off to sleep, still wrapped in each other's arms, the first night of many they would spend together as husband and wife. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Willow's life. Mrs. Hobbs returned from Denver, delighted to find her two favorite people married, and life at Whispering Pines fell into a new rhythm. Days were filled with work, Xavier with his horses, Willow learning to manage the household as its mistress rather than its employee, and nights were filled with love and laughter. Frank Turner never returned to Silverwood Creek, though they heard rumors that he had moved further west, seeking his fortune in the gold fields of California. Willow occasionally wondered about him, but found that the hurt and fear he had caused her had faded, replaced by the joy of her new life. As autumn approached, bringing with it cooler days and the first hints of color in the aspen leaves, Willow made a discovery that filled her with both excitement and trepidation. For several mornings in a row, she had awakened feeling queasy, certain smells suddenly turning her stomach. Mrs. Hobbs noticed her pushing away her breakfast one morning and fixed her with a knowing look. "How long has it been since your monthly courses, dear?" she asked when Xavier had left for the day. Willow blushed, quickly calculating in her head. "Almost 2 months," she realized with a start. Mrs. Hobbs smiled broadly. "I thought as much. You're carrying a child, my dear." The news filled Willow with wonder. A baby, her and Xavier's child, growing within her. That evening, she waited until they were alone on the porch, watching the sunset as had become their custom, to share the news. "Xav," she began, her heart pounding with excitement, "I have something to tell you." Xavier turned to her, his expression curious. "What is it, love?" Taking a deep breath, Willow placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she said softly, "in the spring." Xavier's eyes widened, a range of emotions crossing his face: surprise, joy, wonder, and finally, a love so intense it took Willow's breath away. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." Then he was gathering her into his arms, his kisses peppered with laughter and tears of joy. "I love you," he said over and over. "I love you so much." "And I love you," Willow replied, her own cheeks wet with happy tears. "More than I ever thought possible." That night, as they lay in bed, Xavier's hand resting protectively over her stomach, Willow reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From terror and desperation to love and security, from a woman fleeing her kin's blows to a wife and mother-to-be, safe in the arms of the man who had promised to be her shelter always. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About how life can change so completely," she replied. "A few months ago I had nothing, now I have everything." Xavier propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with a love that still made her heart skip a beat. "You had everything inside you all along," he said softly. "Strength, courage, love. You just needed a safe place to let it bloom." Willow reached up to touch his face, marveling at the man who had become her world. "And you gave me that safe place. You found me at my lowest and said, 'I'll be your shelter always.'" "And I meant it," Xavier replied, leaning down to kiss her. "Always and forever, my love, always and forever." As spring arrived, painting the meadows with wildflowers and filling the air with the scent of new growth, Willow's time drew near. The ranch hands had built a cradle of polished pine, Mrs. Hobbs had sewn tiny garments, and Xavier had converted the room next to theirs into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow suitable for either a boy or a girl, as he put it. On a beautiful May morning, with birdsong filling the air outside their window, Willow went into labor. The midwife was sent for, and Mrs. Hobbs bustled about preparing everything needed for the birth. Xavier refused to leave Willow's side despite both women's insistence that men traditionally waited elsewhere. "My place is with my wife," he said firmly, holding Willow's hand as the contractions intensified. Hours later, as the sun was setting, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to Xavier's eyes. The midwife cleaned the baby and placed her in Willow's arms, her tiny face scrunched and red, a dusting of dark hair on her perfect head. "She's beautiful," Xavier whispered, awe in his voice as he gently touched his daughter's cheek. "Just like her mother." Willow looked up at him, her heart so full of love she thought it might burst. "What shall we name her?" Xavier considered for a moment. "How about Hope?" "Because that's what she represents, our hope, our future, our love made manifest." "Hope Abernathy." Willow tested the name, smiling as the baby opened her eyes, revealing irises the same summer sky blue as her father's. "It's perfect." As night fell over Whispering Pines Ranch, the new family of three rested together, Xavier's arms encircling both his wife and daughter protectively. Outside, the stars appeared one by one, witnesses to the love that had bloomed from the darkest of circumstances, a love that had begun with a woman fleeing harm and a man who had offered her shelter, and had grown into something beautiful and enduring. "Thank you," Willow murmured as sleep began to claim her, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "For what?" Xavier asked, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "For finding me, for saving me, for loving me." Xavier smiled, his eyes moving from his wife's beloved face to the tiny miracle sleeping in her arms. "No, my love," he corrected softly. "Thank you for finding the courage to run, for stumbling into my camp, for changing my life completely. You saved me just as much as I saved you." As their daughter slept peacefully between them, Willow and Xavier shared a look of perfect understanding. They had found in each other not just shelter, but home, a place of safety, of love, of belonging. And in that home, they would raise their daughter to know strength and kindness, courage and compassion. Life would bring challenges, as it always did on the frontier, but they would face them together, their love a fortress against whatever storms might come. For Xavier had made a promise that night beneath the cottonwood trees, and he had kept it faithfully to be Willow's shelter always. And in the shelter of each other's love, they had found everything they had ever needed.